Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Tom Finn podcast. I'd just like to thank everyone for listening to the first episode. All your advice and feedback and everything is very much appreciated, so thank you for that. The first episode was kind of like a pilot, so things are going to change and hopefully improve as time goes on. The last episode and this episode will be available on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can listen to podcasts really. But for now, episode 2's guest is Graham Duff. Graham is an English writer, actor and producer. He wrote Dr. Terrible's House of Horrible for the BBC in 2001, which starred Steve Coogan as Dr. Terrible and various other characters. He also co-wrote this with Steve Coogan and Henry Normal. From 2005 to 2011, he wrote the show Ideal, also for the BBC, starring Johnny Vegas as drug dealer Moz. Along with these, he's also written many other projects for TV and radio, as well as various acting gigs, including a role in Harry Potter. We spoke about that, among many other things about his life and career. Even if you've not seen any of Graham's work, he has a lot of great insight and advice about work ethic and creative process and things, so there's something here for everyone, I think. He's also a lovely and warm person, so I do hope you enjoy this conversation with Graham Duff. We spoke before about we're both from small towns. So you grew up in a small town up north, right?
Yeah, it's called Great Harwood. It's sort of between Blackburn and Accrington, if that helps at all. It was a small town. I definitely felt that I was growing up away from the action.
Yeah.
Which you don't realise until you're about 12, 13 and television and cinema teaches you about other options and you realise you're not seeing any of those options in the little place you're growing up,
Did you have, similar to me where I grew up, you love like the woods and things like that you have. Was it kind of that kind of small town?
Well, it's sort of what, it has like a big swimming bath there, and it had a few pubs and several schools, and within a couple of minutes walk you would be in the countryside, and there was woods and Pendle Hill was very close by, so you got a lot of countryside there. But I have to be honest and say I was never that asked about the countryside.
Oh, right.
It's not a big thing for me, and I know a lot of people country walks or that. It doesn't do anything for me really. I know what I'm supposed to see and feel when I'm confronted with the majesty of nature. I don't really feel it, if I'm honest.
You sort of walk around going, this is how I should feel, but it's not how I actually feel.
Not at all. I probably benefited from growing up in a town that sort of was fringed by immediate countryside, but I don't think I really appreciated it at the time.
Yeah, I think I got sick of it after a while, and then I remember I was at a Waitrose and I was walking around, I was looking at everyone, and it was probably around 16, 17, 18, and I suddenly was sick of the sight of every person I saw. I was sick of seeing people I recognised all the time. Yeah. That sort of weird snobbery that you get around in those kind of places. It's very Wicker Man sometimes when you walk around these kind of small towns.
But it's insular, isn't it? It's that sort of, it's the closed world. But it's weird, that thing about saying the same faces, because I know, because I live in Brighton, and usually if you're editing a TV thing, it's in London. And so for the period of the edit, you commute up to London, so I 4 or 5 days a week I'm going up to London. And you start really recognising the same faces on the train, and something inside me really kicks against that. I'm thinking, you're probably really nice people, but I don't need to be confronted by you every day.
Yeah. So is there much work down in Brighton for you?
Well, because I suppose the prime thing that I do is far from the only thing, but the prime thing I do is writing, and you can sort of write anywhere. So it's as easy to be in Brighton as it is anywhere else. And I moved here 1982, so I've spent all my adult life here really. So it definitely feels like home. There's some radio production companies here that occasionally do work for. There's bits and pieces. There's live stuff. I DJ on a station that's based in Brighton. But really, if I'm honest, most of my actual work, most of my production work is either London or Manchester.
Do you ever feel like just moving up to either London or Manchester Just think, let's just go.
I don't think about moving to London because I think I'm close enough as it is without having to. I can dip my toe without it being corroded by the acid that is London. But yeah, no, I do think about moving to Manchester. And in the last 15 years or so, I've spent so much of my time there anyway. It's like 2 or 3 months at a time. And also my mum's there, my sisters are there, because that's very close to where I grew up. I do think about being there. I do spend a lot of time there anyway. So it's always been a vague option that I might move there, yeah.
When you were at your hometown, how was school for you?
I had some mild dyslexia and also quite severe dyscalculia, which is dyslexia with numbers, and also it affects all sorts of things like you can't tell left from right. If something doesn't sort of grasp your interest, then it's just gone. It doesn't sink in. So I was in a daydream, I think, for a lot of my school years. But at the same time, I was really struggling because nothing was going in, and I couldn't read. I didn't learn to read until I was 9. So, I just sat there and disappeared into my own dream world a lot of the time. So junior school was a bit of a vague sort of time. I think when I got to secondary school, I snapped into focus a little bit. And also we started doing things I was interested in. There was a drama class there with a great drama teacher called Doreen Grimshaw, who was just phenomenal and just really sparked my imagination. Yeah. And, I suddenly started to get this idea that, these things that I enjoy, these TV programs, they're written by people, and they're, and it's got an industry around it, and from about the age of 11, I started thinking, right, I want to write for TV, and I knew that's what I wanted to do really early on.
Did you ever lose the magic at all? When I was younger, and I realised that films and TV and stuff didn't just happen, and that actors were people that were paid, and it was written, and cartoons were hand drawn and things like that, I lost the magic until about 5 years later, and then gained like a new appreciation, and then became obsessed with how things were made rather than them being just magic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. That didn't happen to me somehow. It sort of added to it somehow. It added to the excitement and the fascination. It was like there was this other world going on behind the world that you're enjoying. Which I was like most kids of my generation. I was obsessed by Doctor Who in the 70s and so on. So it was like, there's all this stuff that you're seeing on screen, and then behind that, there's these workshops where they make these amazing masks and record this bizarre electronic music. And so it was like, I think I became fascinated by the idea of the two worlds in parallel in a way.
I remember I realised that I enjoyed the behind the scenes on DVDs more than the actual film sometimes. The new Star Wars films, I'm not the biggest fan of them, but the making of, when they show those like behind the scenes and the animatronics and stuff, it gets me buzzed every time. I'm like, oh my God, look at that. And I watch it and go, okay, that was fine, but I would rather watch sort of a 2-hour film of them making it than the actual film.
Yeah, but I think that is part of the curse of like the sort of big, special effects sci-fi blockbuster. That is where all the attention is. Even within the narrative. That's the number of times people say, "Did you see such and such film?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't really like it." And they go, "Well, the effects are good though, aren't they?" I think, well, yeah, the effects were good, but effects are like it's like if you served a meal in a restaurant, it's really bland, but the garnish is delicious. Yeah. You still wouldn't go back to that restaurant. You wouldn't like, people go, yeah, but the garnish is good, isn't it? And it, I don't know. All these Marvel films. I was never into comics, so I'm clearly not the target audience. Yeah. But I just find all that stuff just a bit, I don't know, just pure bombast, really. Yeah. But all these films are pushing 3 hours now.
Yeah, I know. That used to be a thing that people would question, and now it's like, 3 hours is not.
It's like, they want to get your money's worth. You want to get enough explosions in.
Yeah. I always say that I wish they brought these Marvel films out like 10 years ago when that was my thing. Yeah. But now I'm too old and cynical to enjoy it, which is annoying. But I'm sure there's millions of kids out there where this is the best time to be alive for them.
I think there's a million of adults that feel the same. There's plenty of people of older generations that for them is cinema. And that's fine. That's what they're getting out of it. But for me, it just it doesn't engage me so much.
Well, so was there a point at school then when you realised, oh, this is what I want to do? Did you know that's what you wanted to do, or was it just an interest?
No, I was 11 years old and I'd been watching Genesis of the Daleks, the Doctor Who story, and I was in the garden with my mum, and she mentioned something about, you know, what you might do when you leave school, and I said, oh, I want to write for television. I'd sort of decided that you know, I wanted to make something as good as Doctor Who, which is quite arrogant, really, for an 11-year-old. Yeah. And my mum, bless her, said, well, I don't know how you do that, but yeah, if that's what you want to do, you should give it a go. And, you know, you know, like I said, I was 12, that stuck in my mind. So obviously that, her sort of giving me permission, you know, rather than saying, oh, well, nobody from, you know, from Great Harwood could do that, or
have a backup,
you know, have a backup or anything like that. You know, my parents were great like that. You know, they really just allowed me to follow what I wanted to do without sort of, you know, because there was no history in my family. Nobody, as far as I can tell, you know, immediate family or ancestors has any sort of showbiz or directly creative stuff. So I think I was a bit of an anomaly, really.
Yeah.
So it would have been very easy for them to say, oh, hang on, you know, get a trade or whatever. But there was never any of that, you know.
At any point, did you feel like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to do? Or was there a struggle of like, I hope this is what I'm going to do. This is hard. Oh
yeah, God, I mean, decades of this is hard. Yeah. You know, I think,
does that ever stop?
Yeah, I don't think it does, you know, and yeah, you know, I sort of knew what I wanted to do, but I had, and always have had since, like quite a broad range of interests. So I wasn't naive enough to think, you know, 11 years old, right, I'm going to write my first script now and send it off. I just knew that's what I do. So I sort of, once I could read at 9, I was a voracious reader, and I read all the James Bond books, Doctor Who stuff, and I got interested in art, and so I was just absorbing stuff all the time. So I wanted to write, but I knew that wasn't going to happen yet. So I was acting in, you know, drama lessons and school plays and things, and I was really into art. So the art classes were appalling at the school, but again, I just disappeared into my own world and did what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I was just a really precocious, creative kid, I think. But I also had a few friends. I wasn't completely in my own dream world, you know. So yeah, I knew what I wanted to do, but I sort of knew I was going to have to bide my time a bit. So the other obsessions that I had sort of, you know, kept me going. And I just knew I wanted to write, and I always did write. And in English lessons where they'd say, write a page on such and such a thing, or write a short story, I would literally write 20 or 30 pages. It was like I couldn't stop, you know. And I think, you know, initially Mr. McLaughlin, my English teacher, was really encouraging. And then after a while, I sort of could tell that he was sort of saying, yeah, I can tell you can do this, but you don't need to, because I realise now, of course, he was thinking, oh, God, I've got to look at the spelling of a 25-page story. Yeah. All the other kids have only done a page and a half, you know. So, yeah, I think but it was just like an unattended fire hose, basically. Yeah. I just always did them. Anytime free time at home, I would either draw or write and, you know, disappear into my own world.
I had an English teacher called Mrs. Neve that was great, because I would always get very excited when it was creative writing. That was the only thing. I was like, great, I can do this. And then I would do these long, sort of weird, violent stories that, again, now I look back on it, and at that time I was super proud, but I'm like, she must have been like, oh God, okay, fine. Yeah. I'll read 10 pages of someone being stabbed. And then one day she was like, you should write scripts, because you clearly are wanting to write films, but this is like a short story, not a short film thing. And then because of that, I started getting into, you know, making short films and stuff like that, where, because I think like you, maybe I sort of grew up being creative, having creative outlets and sort of drawing or writing stuff, but not knowing I couldn't hone it into something until like much later, when I realized, oh, I like radio and TV and things like that. And you start going, oh, I can actually do something with this now. You don't feel like just a weird kid at school.
Yeah, but then, you know, for your generation, there is a greater immediacy and an easier connection to the media world, you know, and that is something I feel really envious of, because when I was younger, it was like, if you wanted to find out, for instance, where a TV production company were based, you'd have to go to a library and order a special book and find not that I ever did that, but it's just, that sort of thing of like the media and TV and film being this industry that you could join in with just was completely alien. It felt so otherworldly.
Sometimes I feel like, I don't know, it's a classic thing of like, oh, this is a good thing now, but also a bad thing with most things that change. So with how easy it is to just connect into the media world, especially for young people, I want to go back to myself included and to a lot of young people and be like, don't put anything up on YouTube until you're like in your 20s at least, because you think it's good, but it's not good. And it's great to start making stuff and trying it, but that's going to be out there on the world now for people to see forever.
Yeah.
And you're going to regret it. It's like, please don't put your opinions up for a long time because you don't know what you're talking about. It takes, I think, a lot. You need life experience to help with your work. I think you get a lot of young people that think they can make stuff, and you can make stuff to an extent, but you need that actual life to back up your ideas, I think.
Well, I think so, because there are exceptions definitely, but I think because once you've lived a bit of life, then those experiences, the people that you meet, the things that you go through, the things that you survive and so on, they become part of your influence. Whereas when you're young, your influences are all completely external. They're all just other comedians, other films, other games. So your voice is just this sort of mishmash of all that. But now I was talking to a friend of mine, actor Paul Putner, and he was saying he was so glad that whole sort of internet YouTube thing wasn't about when he was a teenager. He said, because all my first half-assed sketches, they'd be up there forever, and that would be really quite cringy.
Yeah. I'm experiencing that myself, but hopefully no one will find it. At what point, how did you go from being at school, kind of knowing what you wanted to do, to being at uni with sort of you doing live shows and things like that, right?
Well, I went to school. I left school when I was 16, or just before my 16th birthday. And what I wanted to do was go, because there wasn't really anywhere where you could learn how to write scripts, as far as I could see. There was English literature courses, but I didn't want to write books.
Yeah.
I wanted to write scripts, and there just didn't seem anywhere to do that. So I thought, right, well, I want to do something within this sphere. So I thought, right, well, maybe I should go to RADA, acting, and that's. But I think you had to be 18 or 19 to go to RADA, and I was 16. I think, well, I'm not going to hang around, So I thought, well, the other big thing I'm interested in is art, so I thought I'll go to art school. So I did a 2-year foundation in Blackburn, and so whilst I was there, I was in a band, so I was doing music. I was still writing. I was doing art, and that that involvement just carried me along. So then I applied to go to universities, and I got in at Leeds, but then I got offered a place at Brighton, and I just thought, Brighton's probably a bit nicer place to spend your time than Leeds. And also it was further away. Leeds is quite close to where I grew up, and I just loved the idea of like really, striding out. So I came to Brighton and did a course which was at the time called Expressive Arts, which is an appalling name. Obviously all art is expressive, and that was a mixture of 3 days fine art, 1 day art history, and another day was an option, which was either music, dance or theatre, and I did the theatre option. So that was a way of like combining my interest in fine art, writing and performance. And within, a month or so of starting the course, I formed, initially it was a duo, but then quite soon there was 5 of us, a sort of performance arts / theatre company called Theatre of the Bleeding Obelisk, right. Which was originally we were called the Theatre of the Bleeding Obvious, but we decided to change it. And that just took off. It was weird. We did shows in Brighton, and then we got offered other shows. And so by the time I was in the 3rd year, because we'd sort of been touring and stuff, and we did in total we were operating for about 5 years. So the 3 years that we were at college, and then 2 years after that, we did 60 odd gigs, which for a performance art group is quite a lot.
Yeah.
And we did like the ICA in London, we did the Melkweg in Amsterdam, we did gigs at Manchester Town Hall, the Elephant Fair in Cornwall, all these places. So I was continually doing a bit of fine art and stuff, but this idea of like performing, and we were writing shows, performing them, building the sets, creating the costumes, doing the soundtrack, and it just carried us. You know, I left school and left college rather, and just kept on doing that, and almost didn't notice leaving college in a way, because the strictures of that world didn't matter, because we'd found this thing that we were doing. And then after 5 years, that sort of split up, and I then did a double act with a guy called Malcolm Boyle, who I still work with a lot. So yeah, I mean, and all this time I wasn't really earning any money, you know, particularly when you're just like touring theatre company, doing avant-garde theatre, and there's 5 of you and you're running a van and you've got a manager. I mean, we were just scraping by, so we were on the dole most of the time. Yeah. But we absolutely adored what we were doing, you know. It was just, didn't want to do anything else.
What kind of stuff was it?
It was a mixture. We'd do like installation things. It was comedy, but it was very surreal. I mean, we definitely styled ourselves as a sort of absurdist, surrealist group. So it was a mixture of like songs, rituals, sketches. Sometimes we do full length plays, but they were very absurdist. Lots of things with masks. But I mean, it's interesting because there's several things in Obelisk that I would have done when I was between the ages of 19 and 23, which I've still used since. You know, there's characters from Obelisk shows that turned up in Ideal, you know, visual looks that I've used in other stuff. So it was a really fertile time. And the other people, you know, the other 4 people in the group were really inspiring, and they were really strong artists and performers and writers. So it was a period of like just experimenting all the time. And somehow in the mid-80s, you could go to comedy clubs and do stuff that wasn't straight stand-up. You could do these weird things, and people would listen to it, you know, and get into it. Not always. Sometimes people hated us. Yeah. But, you know, there was a possibility to do this sort of more weird avant-garde stuff. It was just in a period before the sort of stand-up world became as sort of formal and commodified as it is now. So that was the sort of seedbed, really.
So you have you ever done just sort of more straight stand up or anything like that?
Yes and no. I've done comparing. I used to run a club in Brighton and did comparing, but I always did it as a character. Right. So I'd never really do it as myself. The closest I've gone to straight stand up is a guy called James Poulter, who I was at university with. He was in the year below me, but I think we're the same age. We formed a double act. And we did 2 shows, one called The A to Z of Drugs and one called The A to Z of Taboo. And it was a mix. The A to Z of Drugs was about that, basically. It was going through the whole alphabet of drugs, you know, from the sort of most obscure ones to the most common ones. And it was a mixture of actual factual information about drugs, comedy improvisation with the audience, and testing legal highs. And it's at the beginning of the show, giving certain legal highs to the audience, and then checking in with them throughout the show to see the guy, getting people on stage and doing like faux acid trips with them and stuff. Yeah. So we did that for 3 years, and that's the closest I've done to sort of being me on a stage, just talking directly to an audience. But even then, it was a sort of version of me, really.
Do you think is there a reason that you always do characters? Because I've seen you as well sort of pop up in your own shows as these like strange characters, and it seems like you like to do these people.
Yeah, well, I like to do, if I'm acting, I like to do, and I've got the choice. I mean, obviously, if it's somebody else's thing, it's a gig, and you do that. But if I've got the choice, I like to do characters that are a long way from me, because there's more creativity in that. You know, I mean, some actors excel at just doing sort of slightly heightened versions of themselves, whereas I like to do things that are a long way from me, because I think it's more fun, it's more creative, and more interesting. And the thing is, as well, is like, this is a podcast, but I'll spell this out for people. I'm 6'2", I'm quite chunky, and I've got a shaven head and a beard. Right. So casting directors don't look at me and think, ooh, he could play a dancing instructor, or he could be a geography teacher. It's basically the things I get offered in terms of other people's henchman, assassin, pirate, paedophile, Nazi. You know, these are all things I've done. I'm not plucking these out of the air. So that I know that's how I look to the world, which is a bit disappointing, really, you know, because that's not how I see myself. So if in my own work, I have always, this is something after a while I realised that's what I was doing. It wasn't really a strategy. I always play parts that I think, and nobody would have cast me as this. So like a quite gentle doctor, or, you know, very camp gay guy, or, you know, a sort of bit of a sort of bumbler or something that's different. You know, and it does work. It's not like people go, well, he should be a Nazi skinhead. Why is he playing that character?
I just don't believe it.
Yeah, so it's... that's the thing, you know, with acting, so much of it is a modelling assignment in a way. You know, when you're acting other people's things, a lot of it is, you can tell, you know, people look through casting directors and they're judging you on your photo. That's how they get you in. You know? And so I do appear on stage or in front of audiences, you know, as me, talking like I'm talking now. But that's when I'll lecture about screenwriting, or talk about, you know, or lecture about things I'm interested in. But if it's a performance, I prefer to be somebody else. Really.
Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of fun as well when you're doing that stuff. From my perspective,
good.
When I watch it, I'm like, oh, you look like you're really enjoying doing that.
Well, it's as long as it looks fun and not too indulgent.
No. How did the sort of live shows that you were doing turn into the writing gigs and writing your own TV and stuff?
Well, we tried to, we had a couple of attempts to do a TV version of A to Z of Drugs, and people were just too nervous about it.
When would this been?
This would have been about 96, 97.
Okay.
So we toured with 300 and something gigs. You know, we did I think 3 or 4 Edinburgh festivals. We toured the country. We did a 9-week residency in Melbourne. It was exhausting as well, because it's just that thing of like, I mean, touring in itself is tiring, but just constantly improvising as members of the audience, and also we were under the microscope quite a bit at the time. You know, we got interviewed by the police a couple of times. We ended up having to testify on somebody else's behalf in court over one of the legal high things that was. So you know, so we'd do interviews for TV and radio and so on, but a lot of it was about the legality of the situation, the morality of it, and so on. And you know, basically, I just want to do shows and just want to, you know, entertain people and connect with ideas. But we spend a lot of time, I suppose, being called on to validate what we were doing, you know. And I think that translated into the TV thing. So when we started talking to TV production companies, you know, part of what was under debate was the legality of it and all the furore around it. And I naively thought, that's probably a good thing, isn't it, the publicity? But people, you know, in mid-90s, a slightly different time, people are a bit more tentative.
I suppose like they'll get in trouble rather than you'll get in trouble, sort of thing. Yeah.
Or, you know, we'll take them down with us or something. I don't know. So that's sort of, we had a couple of goes of that, and that fizzled out. And I did I think while we were away in Australia, we were doing these like 9 weeks of shows. A lot of time just hanging around, really, because we had a show pretty much, I think, every night. So it's like you could go out sightseeing or travel around. And I think we had one night off. So I had loads of time just on my own there. So I wrote a one-man show, which when we did Edinburgh the next year, we did the A to Z of Taboo, I think, and I also did my one-man show, which was called Vine Lanorak, and it was about music obsessives, and I played 20 different characters, like in a series of vignettes about the world. You know, like there was a bedroom DJ, like a classical composer, you know, an obsessive fan, and some of the sketches were short, some were longer. And it did reasonably well and got, you know, it wasn't like one of the big successes of the festival, but it did okay and got audiences in. And it felt like it really worked as a show. And so I did, I think perhaps the last show I did, or the penultimate show, I got a desk recording of that, and it sounded really good. And I was listening, I was thinking, this sounds like a radio show. So I sent it to a friend of a friend who was a radio producer called Nick Ware at BBC, and I said, I think this is a show, what do you think? And so we edited down some of the things and sent them, and it got commissioned. So I did a series for my first series for Radio 4, which was called Stereo Nation. It was a 6-part series. And I took 6 of the characters from the show and did like a little quarter of an hour show of each of those.
Yeah.
And so that was my first thing. Before that, I'd done a little bit of stuff on Loose Ends on Radio 4, doing like a little column on that. And so doing Stereo Nation on Radio 4, which I think was 1998, that was the first thing where it was like my show with my name on it that I'd written, and there was a couple of other actors in it as well. But that was the first time when I sort of thought, this is my thing.
Yeah. How did it feel to get something on Radio 4?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, I mean, because it was, I think, one of the great things about radio, and you only learn this as you progress out of the world of radio, is from when somebody says yes, that's pretty much it until you deliver the final thing, and or you deliver the scripts, make a few questions or suggestions, and then you record it, and that's it. And because there's not masses of money involved in radio, people give you a bit more leeway. So I felt like I produced something that was exactly what I wanted to produce. It was about subject, music and music obsession, which are things that are close to my heart, and I performed with actors I wanted to perform with. The producer was great, and I got a band I loved at the time called Eeyore did the theme music, and it felt like a complete thing. And I think I was very lucky early on to do a show where I had not 100% artistic control, and I don't necessarily think that's the best thing anyway, but I had a lot of artistic control, and when it came out, I just thought, I can stand by this 100%. I can say, this is my show, and none of that thing that I had friends who'd done shows, TV and radio, and they said, it's sort of there, but they made us do this, or they wouldn't let us do that. And I didn't have any of that. I just sort of thought, no, this Stereo Nation is what I wanted to do, and it's great. But that didn't mean it got a second series. So it just went out, and that was it.
Have you ever made something where they've let you have complete control, and it didn't go the way you wanted, and you thought, God, I wish someone was there to tell me no?
No, but then I've never hankered after complete control.
Okay.
And all these things are collaborative efforts, and I'm sure most creative individuals love to think that they know exactly. But you start these things, and people make suggestions, and you'd have to have a pretty toxic ego to sort of think, that's a good suggestion, but I don't want it because it's not my idea. So no, I think
I've seen people like that at universities and things. As I was going, I used to be like that. I think most people do when they start out at like college and uni and stuff. They think, well, I'm going to be the next Tarantino or the next Kubrick, whatever. And then I started realizing, oh God, no, I need people's help. I don't know how to set up lights. Someone help me. You need a team of people.
Excuse me. You really do, and I think we've become increasingly seduced by the notion of the auteur theory. And what always strikes me as so odd is so many of the people that held up as being auteurs, they weren't. They didn't do it all. Kubrick. It's like Kubrick didn't write all his scripts. He co-wrote some of them, but so he's not an auteur. Hitchcock, Louis Buñuel. These are all people that had core collaborators that weren't necessarily the name on the marquee like they were, but their crew. You remove Carrier from Buñuel's work, or you remove Hitchcock's wife from his work, or you remove Terry Southern or whoever from Kubrick, and it's then what are you left with? You're left with some brilliant elements, but not the whole package.
It seems like, I don't know, film people like the idea of authorship.
Oh, definitely, and that's what everybody wants to do. Film schools are churning out people that want to have directed, written, produced, and edited by, and just one name. And there's a number of times when I was offered like. Do you want to direct the next series of Ideal, or do you want to direct this or whatever? And I was thinking, well, I hardly have any free time anyway, and I had young kids at the time, and I was thinking, well, I don't really get to see them very much. And if I direct as well as writing and producing and being in it and being in the edit and choosing the music, it's like, well, I'd probably go a little bit mad and be less pleasant to be with. And I don't know how good it was, and I still think that, and I've directed bits and pieces since, but I think that notion that one can carry the whole show, that one can become the campaign, I think you've got to have a very specific kind of mania to carry that through, and I don't think it necessarily leads to brilliant work.
I was going to ask, after you've initially written something, how much are you involved from that point till the end?
Well, again, I've been very, very fortunate in that the majority of stuff I've done, I have been involved from beginning to end. And I think One of the reasons for that is because most of what I've done, 80% of what I've done, is comedy. And I think my engagement with the world of TV production coincided with a time when the notion of the sort of the writer, actor, creator, or whatever was gaining currency, because there'd been a lot of success with it, with people like League of Gentlemen, say, or Peter Kay. So I think it was accepted that, like, well, you know, if you just take the script and then take it away from them, it's like, well, you're abandoning this crucial part of it. And the thing is, you know, it's like I spent time on set, and you know, questions come up, things that are watertight in the script. Once you're in production, you start questioning them because the logistics of the set, or certain sort of things to do with the acting or whatever it might be, means that something doesn't work or isn't required, or whatever. And so quite often you're having to make these decisions very quickly about, oh, we can't do this, so what we're going to replace it with, or you know, or is it okay to take this out? We haven't got time to film this, but if we take this out, does this scene render part of the narrative incomprehensible? So all these questions are coming up. And there's been a couple of times when something of mine's been filmed and I've had to be away doing something else, like whether it's a costume fitting or I'm working on some other thing, or a location scout. And you get these slightly panicky phone calls where they say, oh, the scene in the bedroom where she says this, that's not going to work because blah, blah, blah. Yeah. What should we do? And so you're there thinking, oh, shit, what shall we do? What shall we do? Okay, let me look at the script. And then you work it out. If you're there on the set, you can see what the possibilities are, and you know. And there's a couple of times in the first series that I made where decisions were made on things when me and the other writers weren't there, and just slightly, I don't know if everybody would notice, but there's certain thing, that thing I'm talking about of the now part of the narrative doesn't work,
right,
or you know, something remains unresolved because you didn't do this thing. You know, those things come up, and it's like, obviously those are the things that leap out at me whenever I watch those episodes. You know, so no, I've been really fortunate to work with production companies who have sort of carried me, you know, right through the process, and I think as well, you know, if you're acting in the series as well, then you are on set, not necessarily guaranteed every day, but you are on set. So so that's helped, I think, and then, you know, being in the edit and so on. A lot of my work was done with Baby Cow Productions, and they were Henry Norman at Baby Cow and Steve Coogan were really encouraging for not just me, but I think anybody that they work with in terms of writer, creators, for them to be fully involved in it, to make them associate producers, so they felt they had investment in it, you know, in terms of their time and so on.
Did that start because of Dr. Terrible, Dr. Terrible's House of Horrible?
Yeah.
Is that how you met? How did that happen?
I had an idea for... I'd always loved British horror films from the... British horror films, full stop, but particularly from the 70s.
Right.
And so... I'd always loved them, and then I was in a record store in Blackburn and I came across a CD of Hammer themes. I thought, right, this is coming home with me. And then just as I was listening to it, it was so evocative, and I was thinking, I'll do a series about this. And it just felt long enough from, you know, like this was like 1999, I think. No, year 2000. So it felt long enough away that they were part of history and they could be celebrated. So I did, like, I think just 2 or 3 page pitch, and it was one of the things where I thought I really need to pare this down, because it was one of those things that you get when an idea sparks. So I'll start writing reams. I think no, just do a couple of pages, keep this simple. And then I sent it to somebody I knew who was a production assistant at Baby Cow, and they showed it to Henry Normal. And then I think a week later I went in and had a meeting with Steve and Henry, and they were saying, oh, we love this, we want to make this. I was thrilled, you know. But at the same time, I left the office thinking, yeah, but, you know, we've all had a lot of positive meetings in our time that haven't led anywhere. But 9 months later, we started filming, you know, and that was my first TV series. And Henry co-wrote it with me, and Steve did a lot of work on it. Once we were in production, he brought a lot of stuff to the script as well. So we wrote it between the three of us. But it was, you know, you could feel the G-forces from because I think, you know, we had that meeting, and then about, I think a week later, they commissioned a script. Henry and I worked on the script for probably about a month. We put that in, and then a couple of weeks later, they commissioned another 5 scripts and said, well, we'll be filming it starting in April next year. Yeah. It's just like, right, okay, you know, so then it was just full steam ahead, you know. So I was very fortunate.
Oh, was that the first time you met Steve Coogan?
Yes, yeah, it was, yeah, and Henry. And and the thing is that happened. I had since Stereo Nation had gone out, so that was what. So over those 2 years since that, now, I'd been constantly creating scripts and sending them to people and outlines. And that year, when Dr. Terribles was commissioned and the series went ahead, that was one of 3 scripts that I had with production companies that were in development.
Right.
And I had no idea. I sort of thought it's unlikely all 3 of these are going to come off. I'm not that lucky, but there's no way I could have told you which one it was going to be. And that's something I've sort of kept with me throughout what I laughingly call my career, because you don't know. And I always say to people, you've got to love the process more than the project. You've got to love the process of creating, writing, editing, rewriting, re-editing. Because there's no way, I've always got several things in development. And there's no way of knowing which ones are going to get taken up and which ones are going to get cast aside.
Yeah.
So there was Dr. Terribles. There was another one which was about the early days of television in the 1930s, and another one which escapes me now what that would have been. But yeah, so I had these 3 things in development, and then that was the one that was seized. And I think, probably because it was Steve Coogan saying, we want to do this, that was, I'm not kidding myself that it was my glittering text that necessarily swung the deal. But then if the text hadn't been any good at all, they would have got another writer in. So I did feel encouraged that we sort of did the whole series, because I think when we started, Henry Norman was thinking, well, we'll see if he can write a script then, And I remember him at one point, I think I'd delivered 4 of the scripts and then we'd rewritten them together, and we were in a cafe talking about it. He said, one of the great things for me about this is I'm not going to have to get any other writers involved. And I had a little moment where I just thought, shit, it hadn't occurred to me that they might have done that. I was sort of thinking this was my idea, and so that was a bit of a moment where I was thinking, oh yeah, of course. If I was in this position, I'd be thinking maybe we should get some professional writers. But Henry was just, had such faith and was so patient, and he really quickly became, not just a really good friend, but a proper mentor, and he taught me so much. People toss around the word genius very lightly, but I think in terms of comedy and writing, and particularly editing and on-screen editing, Henry is a genius, and I couldn't have wished for somebody better to sort of learn the craft.
There's something I've been appreciating a lot more, which is sort of films and stories that sort of just cut away the fat of things. So I don't know if you've ever seen The Warriors, 1979.
Yes, not for a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a film that I loved as a kid, and I got older and I was like, and I've fallen in love with it again. And I was talking to my friends the other day about how it just completely cuts away the fat. It's just a gang have got to get from the top of New York to the bottom, and they've got to survive. And there's other gangs after them, and that's it. And you don't need anything else if you've just got that core. Because that was something that I think a lot of people do, especially when they're learning, is like, I've got to make it detailed and complicated, and it's got to add this and that and that. Yeah. But if you've got a good story, then that's all you need, really, I suppose.
Yeah, one of my very favourite quotes is by the poet Paul Verlaine, and I couldn't quote you any of his poems, even though some of them are very beautiful. But in conversation at one point, when he was quite young, he said, the surest way to be a bore is to tell the whole story. And I just think, carry that with you, because it is key. It is crucial, and that if you don't obey that, then you end up with these 3-hour meandering films. And, it's not, some 3-hour films can be wonderful, but I think just pare it down. I worked for a little while developing a script with a writer called Stephen Wells, who died a few years ago now, but he'd been an NME writer, but he'd also written novels, and his perspective was very working class, very punk, basically. He'd been one of the writers for Chris Morris when they first did the Day-to-Day on the Hour on the radio, and he was great. He was a lovely guy, and one of the things he said in terms of writing, which has stuck with me, he just said, don't forget, every so often think about first principles. And it's that thing of every so often think about, what did I think was good about this story in the first, or what makes that character interesting, or what's the core of this story? You just not drift so far, and particularly if you're, I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm very enthusiastic about writing. I'm an enthusiastic writer, and I, if I'm not having sex, then I want to be writing.
Right.
That's the only thing I would place like as a greater pleasure.
Yeah. Is there times we go, I wish I was writing right now
Yeah.
instead of doing this?
I think I've thought on occasions I thought, can you combine the two? I don't think you can. So if you've got that attitude, then it's very easy just to sort of write and go down these little avenues and develop this stuff. But I remember Swells used to say, every so often, just think about first principles. And I think that's a really good note for any writer, is just, develop, elaborate, proceed in whatever direction you want. But every so often, remember why it was you wanted to write this story or write about this character.
So you're a big music guy, right?
Yes.
I was wondering, do you listen to music when writing?
Pretty much all the time, yeah.
Do you need to?
No.
I find I have to. If I'm creating something, sometimes I put on a certain album or something, and that will influence me a lot in my writing. Does that happen a lot? Yeah.
And also I'm quite selective with there's certain things I wouldn't listen to when I'm writing because they'd be too, I'd get too distracted or it'd be too dissonant or whatever it might be. But yeah, and I think I've learned, one thing I do, I don't know if it's healthy or not, it probably isn't, but anything I like, I tend to fold into my work.
Yeah.
And so when I'm writing, I'm listening to music, and then part of what I'm doing, I suppose, some of the times is thinking, might this be soundtrack? Might this be, might this help? Might this, and when I was writing Dr. Terribles, I was listening to a lot of horror film soundtracks, obviously, why wouldn't you? And also the other thing I do, I present a online music show every week, and that's pretty much 90% new music, so stuff that's come out in the last couple of weeks. So I'm always looking for new music, and I always have. It's just, I'm just thinking about what's going to happen next and what's great that I haven't heard. And, and the thing is, it's difficult to imagine there would be time or space for me to absorb more new music than I do. But every week, literally somebody's saying to me, have you heard so? I think, no. Oh, God, that's great, and that's, that's wonderful that there's so much out there. So, I think music is really key to what I do. But I think, I have this thing where I think if something matters to you, it's painful when it's wrong. Yeah. And it's like, I can be watching something on TV or something, and then the soundtrack selections that are sometimes made are sometimes either so on the nose, or the other one is so familiar. Like James Brown, I Feel Good. Yeah. Or Nina Simone's My Baby Just Cares For Me. Brilliant songs, no question about it. But you put them on a soundtrack, and actually I don't think they are then soundtrack music. They are sort of signifiers of otherness. So, because I've always tried to use stuff that isn't particularly well known. Not necessarily that sounds obscure or sort of atonal or really weird, but just doesn't have lots of baggage. Because I think the thing is, if you're watching something and then a piece of familiarish music comes on, it gives you that slight buzz of nostalgia or a little connection to your past, or it reminds you of. But that nudges you outside the drama. And I think what you need to be as an audience is focused on the drama, on the story, on the characters, not thinking, oh, I like this. Yeah, we heard this at Barbara's wedding, didn't we? I don't think that's right. So part of what I'm looking for in terms of musical score, a couple of things that I've done, music has been specifically commissioned for that. And obviously that's completely new and a different thing. But if I'm looking for sound cues, as something like Ideal or Heaven or Stereo Nation has a lot of sound cues in. And I think what I want is something that helps create that world, helps underline that world, not creates a parallel world in which you've got memories or associations with the music. Yeah. Unless that's what you're trying to do. Obviously, there's points where if it's, the wedding thing, if it's a wedding, then you might want to use some music that would be played at a wedding or whatever. I saw you in Harry Potter. How did that happen? Because when I saw it and I looked up, I was like, oh my God, there you are. Because I knew you at that point. So it was really weird. Yeah, I think This probably sounds wanky, but I think everybody else is more impressed with that than I am.
Oh, really?
I mean, it was just... I had no connection to Harry Potter. I hadn't read the books or anything. I hadn't watched any of the films. And I've got 3 sons. None of them particularly bothered by Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And so it was just an acting gig, basically. I got invited along to do a casting. And I thought, well, this would be good if we get this, But, you think of that about all castings, whilst at the same time thinking, probably won't know, because most of the time you don't.
Yeah.
So I went along, and at the time I went for the audition, they didn't even have a script. They had a description of the character. And so I was sitting there with a woman, and she said, sorry, we don't have a script, but you'll be playing quite a sort of evil, cruel character, a Death Eater. You know Death Eaters? And I went, yeah, not a clue. And she said, so could you just have you played any evil characters before? I said, yeah, I've played quite a few. And she said, well, could you just describe those on camera? And so... she pressed play, then literally put her head down and started texting or playing Tetris. I wasn't really watching what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I talked about playing Fist in Ideal. It was probably the most sort of unpleasant and evil character I'd played. And she said, oh, thank you very much. And that was that. And then I think it was about a month later when I'd completely written it off, because usually if you get something, and they were starting shooting quite soon, I think. Usually if you get something, you would hear in the next week, or they'd say, come in and have another go.
Yeah.
So about a month later, and then I got a call saying, yeah, they want you to do it. Here's the production dates and so on. And it was starting about a month later. And the character I played, it wasn't called this when it was in the cast list, but when it was in the script, my character was called Squat Man.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm 6'2".
Yeah.
I reckon somebody else said yes, then they dropped out or couldn't do it, and that's why they got me in.
Right.
So yeah, it was months and months of turning up at Leavesden Studio, but actually very little filming.
Yeah.
And weirdly, the first week was the most intense week, where it's a scene from the Deathly Hallows Part 1 where all the Death Eaters sit around the table.
Yeah.
And that was a week, like filming that one scene,
Right.
which, when you're used to working in television where you've got a week to shoot a half-hour episode.
Yeah.
And you feel up against it as soon as you start. That was just phenomenal. I mean, obviously there's a lot of characters in that scene, but still, to have that, the luxury of that time. And that was one of the things, because really at that point, I think Harry Potter basically was the British film industry, so you were there at the studio and they, they'd spent a decade making these films. That's all the studio was given over to, and just the scale of it was phenomenal, and I was coming from a situation where we were making a series where we were saying, well, we could have this actor, or if we have cheaper catering, we could have this actor.
Right.
And you think, do you want to have cheaper catering? Is that going to piss off the actor? Or you're just trading all the time. And Harry Potter was phenomenal because, you'd go to this warehouse and there'd be 300 costumes, for this battle scene. And so we did the first scene in about a week, and then after that we were shooting the second film, or my scenes for the second one, and that was literally months of turning up, sitting in a trailer in a cape with a big gash on the back of my head, just writing. And then sometimes you'd get called out, and there was this big battle scene. We'd go out into this courtyard and we'd hang around for about an hour, and the DOP would be looking at his lens looking at them and saying, "No, too cloudy," and he'd be back in, and it was day after day of that. And I mean, it was great on some levels because you get paid for every day you turn up, and I basically had loads of writing to do, so I was just in my trailer writing. Made something like good new friends on it. There was a couple of actors I knew who were working on the film anyway, so it was an interesting time. But I didn't tell anybody. Well, I didn't say to everybody, "Oh, I'm in the new Harry Potter film," because I thought I've been there before, where you do these things and you think, "Oh, it's going to be great," and then you're just not in it. You just get edited.
It was like they cut Rick Mail out of the first film.
Yeah.
Which upset me when I found out.
I know. I mean, there's and history is littered with, did you know there was a version that had so?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's anything anybody would have ever said about me, because nobody be bothered. So I just thought, I'm not gonna start trumpeting about this.
Yeah.
And then I was in Manchester filming or rehearsing something, and I was in this hotel, and I just started getting texts from friends, and what happened was the Friday, I think, and the film had just come out, and loads of my friends had gone to take their kids to, and was like, "You're in the new Harry Potter film, you didn't tell me." And I was just thinking, oh, right, so I am in it.
Yeah.
The problem is, that made me feel confident and cocky. So the second film, when that was coming out, I'd had a lot more scenes in the second film, and I even have a death scene where during a battle I was killed by Maggie Smith, and I sort of collapsed out of frame and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was saying, oh, a new Harry Potter film coming out, and I've been there, and then I saw it, and that scene had been cut, and the scene where I had my couple of lines, they'd chosen to do it in a really long shot, so it could have been any big bald bloke. So I was right first time. Just keep quiet, don't start gobbing off.
It was weird because I had met you, and then I was sort of looking up and researching stuff for you, and then I saw that you were Harry Potter, and I was like, he doesn't seem like a Harry Potter person. It was really weird. And then, but yeah, that's obviously just an acting gig.
Yes, yeah. But again, that goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, is that is the classic kind of part that I get offered as an actor, is, Death Eater. You know, it's like, nobody thought I could be one of the teachers at Hogwarts. I had to be a Death Eater. So, it's a fun thing to say you've done. And, it was really interesting just to, like I say, just to see something on that scale. I know I got to meet Alan Rickman.
I was going to say, did you meet Alan Rickman?
Yeah, and he was cool. And it was a great thing because a friend of mine, Angela Pell, who's a screenwriter, had written a film that he'd been in like a year or so before. So I was we have a mutual friend. This will get me talking to Alan, But he was lovely.
What was the project you loved doing the most? And was it your best project? Kind of do different questions.
That's interesting. I love doing Ideal, I think as well, because, once something starts going on for a period of time, then you become very close to the people involved. And we did that for 7 years. So
it seemed a passion project to me. When I watched it before this, I was like, this seems like his thing. Like his brain is on the TV here, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, but I think that's true of everything I do. I sort of, there's a thing where a phrase that people use to dismiss stuff if they don't like it. So it's very self-indulgent. And I really struggle with that as a notion, because I think if you're the artist, the self is what you're supposed to be indulging. Yeah. You're supposed to be pulling the art out of yourself. And I know I'm basically writing knob gags a lot of the time, but it is art. It might be a low art, but it's an art. It's any creative endeavor is an art. And I think it's just, I want to be able to as I was saying about Stereo Nation earlier, I want to be able to stand proud for anything I've done and say, yeah, that's my thing. And and I don't have to go, yeah, it's great, I wish I'd done this, or they wouldn't let me do it. I want to be able to say, yeah, this is my thing, and I hope you like it. And I'm really well aware that my tastes, my predilections for stuff is a bit more left field than a lot of people, but it's not unique. I'm constantly meeting people who've got the same sort of obsessions with me, whether it's horror or avant-garde music or industrial music or surrealism or whatever. And it's not these things, they're maybe not mainstream, but they're not super niche. And so I'm aware that if I'm indulging my artistic whims and the things I find fascinating, that there'll be other people that like it. And I'm on Dr. Terrible, I worked with Simon Pegg, and I remember talking to him about that, and I think he was just starting to think about doing a Shaun of the Dead, or they'd got a first draft, and he was just saying it's really important just to go with things that you're into, because other people are obviously into them. We all love to think we're unique, but we're not.
Exactly.
So, and there's a great quote by J.G. Ballard, who's one of my favourite writers, and I think a small influence probably on what I do. And he says, my advice to anybody in any field would be follow your obsessions and let them guide you like a sleepwalker. And that's it. I think Ideal is my brain on screen, but then I think, so is the H.G. Wells thing. And obviously I'm adapting Wells, but I'm choosing the stories, and I'm choosing the most psychedelic things. I'm putting it in a more avant-garde setting, and so I think anything I do is, I think if you don't write to satisfy your own desires, I don't know that you've got a yardstick for if it's any good or not. And if I think of a joke and I laugh at it, then I think, well, then probably other people will laugh at it. And if I find something I think, well, that's a bit surprising, then I hope other people will feel the same way. And you can't always be right. But yes, I think, Ideal holds a lot of affection for me, but I think that's probably as much to do with making so many great friends and being able to have such a big canvas. I've done other things on a smaller scale that I'm as proud of, but there's not as much of it, and I think, and I'm not an idiot. I know that no matter what else I do, and I've done loads of stuff since Ideal, and hopefully I'm, got a career that will carry on. You can't be sure of these things, but hopefully I can continue to write and create things people like. But I know that Ideal is probably what I'll be remembered for, and just good to be remembered for anything. I don't mind, whatever. But it is sweet, and I'm very fortunate that, because it finished probably about 8 years ago now, and it's really nice that people still remember it. And I've talked to people sometimes, and they clearly grew up with it. It's like they were watching it from when they were little, and not little, from when they were 12 or whatever. Completely unsuitable. I won't show it to my 12-year-old.
Yeah. I remember I never watched it, but I remember it being that weird program that was on when I was younger.
Yeah.
That was a time where I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to turn it over.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. Graham Duff. I will link various Graham-related things in the bio. Thank you for listening to episode 2 of the Tom Finn podcast. Episode 3 will hopefully be out sooner rather than later. I hope to have more of a regular scheduled upload thing in the near future. But for now, special thanks to Toby Morgan, not just for his graphics and designs, but for all the help he's given me over the many years. Thank you to Danny Young, Luke Perrett for all of their music. And make sure to check out my social medias to keep up to date with podcast releases and things like that. Link for all of that will be in the bio. But for now, see ya. I hate ending things.
Endings and beginnings.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it at some point probably on a podcast, but I've always had a problem with saying hello and goodbye to people. Yeah. It's always really bothered me. I say hello and I cringe at myself. I say, why did I say hello like that? But how do I say hello? Can I just not turn up and leave?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right.